ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Fight for Our Freedom Radio. And I know I haven't been out here for a while. I've been getting a lot of emails. Everybody's asking me if I'm all right. I'm still here. And I apologize for last week's show. I had totally intended on being out here, and for some reason the day before the show, my phone was taken out of service for 5 days, so it was completely out of my hands. But tonight we are going to have a great show. We are going to update everybody on Planet X. We're going to walk through what the Bible says about it, and we are honored to have John Dinardo come back and join us. And John is very informative on this subject. He's studied this, I think he said over for 14, 15 years, something like that. And, you know, John's very well educated. He's been in the military. He has a master's in physics. He was a high school science teacher for 12th grade for many years. And he has done his homework. So I fully have confidence in everything that John says. Hello, John. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Badbaby. Thanks so much for having me tonight.
Oh, it's an honor to have you back. I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about. For those that don't know about Planet X, because it's more than just Planet X, it's actually a whole little solar system that's coming at us. Why don't you start us out and walk us through well, basically you can tell us how you found out about it and what you have found out about it and what we're expecting that's going to happen.
Okay. First, a little correction in my biography. I do not have a master's degree. I have a bachelor's degree in science education, specializing in physics and biology, certified to teach all of the sciences in the high schools of New Jersey, and I have done so for a brief period and then moved back into electronics, where I spent most of my career in developing expertise in designing and inventing electronic circuits for various companies, including AT&T Bell Laboratories. Okay.
Oh, okay. I apologize for that. I didn't have your bio in front of me, and I was trying to go from memory.
Oh, it's all right. Now, back to the subject. This object, I knew about it, believe it or not, spiritually, when I heard Mark Hazelwood, who was the first expositor of this subject that I know of, around 2002, mistakenly claiming that it would be coming in 2003. And everybody who has the right information about these coming prophetic events always prematurely sets the dates. It's too early. Even Edgar Cayce, the great sleeping prophet, set dates for the great earth disasters way too early, but he did predict them. And that's typically what God does to people who predict things. And Mark Hazelwood may have been somewhat of a prophet in feeling and dreaming, having dreams about these coming disasters, and seeing what he did in his early book, Blindsided, around the year 2000. He stated that he had dreams, and also he had studied many books that showed there in past this object had visited our solar system many, many centuries ago and had caused great disasters. And we look back and we see that what he talked about and other people talked about was that there were great disasters recorded in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, by Moses. Moses was given all of his prophetic writings in the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, by God. God gave him all this information. After all, Moses lived long after all the events of the book of Genesis that we hear about, the flood of Noah's day and all that. Moses lived many centuries thereafter, so he could not have known all the details that he had written in the book of Genesis, except if he had gotten them from God himself. And throughout the book of Genesis, we see that God spoke to Moses, almost with audible voices, Many of us get thoughts from God, but God doesn't give audible voices to us. Anyway, so what happened was in the time of Exodus, during the time of Moses and the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, was that there were great plagues, what the book of Exodus calls the 10 great plagues on Egypt that God created or produced in order to liberate the Israelites. The Israelites were actually not a specific chosen people, but these were representative of the future coming true believers of all races, of all nationalities, colors, and ethnicities, who would be chosen by God, that minority of throughout the entire human race, from the North Pole to the South Pole, that minority that would had some kind of spiritual gift from God, where they would believe that there is a true Creator that keeps us, operates us, created us, and continues to operate us day by day. Very few people believe that because they're under demonic influences, and I'll try to get back to that later on and to show you that these demonic influences are rampaging now throughout planet Earth, through your television and your movies, and the satanic 666 sign that I displayed, I got from a wonderful person who had done it on YouTube, and I included this 666 phenomenon that is proliferating throughout the entertainment industry and the political world, and Donald Trump and Hillary.
You know, I wanted to ask you too, John, about that ceremony, that satanic ceremony that they did down there in Switzerland at the CERN tunnel.
I haven't even heard about that.
Oh, you haven't?
No, but I mean, I would certainly believe it, because I know Trump has been flashing.
They spent billions of dollars on that, and a lot of the world elite were there, and it went on for hours and hours. I'll have to send you the recording of it, where they actually had a goat man, and it was very bizarre. It was totally satanic. There were people that were stripping their clothes off, and they had they had train cars that were going through the tunnel, that people were walking next to them like zombies, and it was all satanic. But mainly they had that goat man flying around and all these entities around him, and what they deciphered it as the birth of the Antichrist.
Oh, well, that certainly does make sense. I mean, Trump was knowingly involved in this, was he not? He was not.
No, he wasn't at that. This was down in Switzerland at the CERN Collider.
Oh,
this was done by the governments down there.
I didn't hear you quite clearly, but I heard you mention Trump involved in this. But anyway, okay, yeah. Well, this whole phenomenon is really, it makes sense.
No, they had the leader of Germany, that woman, I can't think of her name right now.
Angela Merkel.
Yeah, she was there, and a lot of the world leaders, the elite, they were all there. And I mean, when I first posted it, because the day after they did it, I posted it, and I got a lot of flack on Facebook. People were going, "Oh, how do you know this isn't a Hollywood production?" and blah blah blah. But then it ended up going all over the net, and it was even on mainstream news saying that it was very bizarre, and you could tell it was totally satanic. I mean, they also had a clock that kept spinning around and stopping on certain numbers, and I think it's referring to the Doomsday Clock is what they were doing. But they had a flat car with a guillotine on it, and they were just putting it all out there.
Yep. I mean, the clock symbolizes, the Skull and Bones secret society of the Freemasonry. The American branch of Freemasonry and the Skull and Bones, they, inside their tomb, their secret tomb at Yale University, where Herbert Walker Bush and George Bush and John Kerry and all the rest of those Satan worshipers were convened when they went through Yale University. Inside that tomb is a clock, and that clock has what's called Skull and Bones time or something like that. But that clock is 5 minutes fast. And I think the symbology behind that is that they say that they are ahead of everyone else when concocting events, world-shattering events, such as, attacks on America, 9/11 and all that. They know them in advance.
I think they call it the Doomsday Clock, don't they?
The clock in the tomb at Yale University for the Skull and Bones Secret Society, it's called Barbarian. That's what it's called, Barbarian Time. Imagine that.
Ah, I see. I know. I saw the picture of George Bush and all of them sitting around that clock.
Who was that?
There is a picture on the net of George Bush and all of them sitting around the clock.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that amazing? Well, generally what we can conclude from all this is that we see the satanic 666 hand sign, and that's in my video. I like to point people to that. If they have a pen and paper, you could just go to Vimeo, Vimeo, not video, but Vim, Vimeo.com, and type in Planet X Earth Traumas. Just those 4 words, and you should come up with part 3A. And that's the one that I recently put out. And in it, it shows the proliferation of 666 hand signs. That's the Antichrist hand sign. And what it is that the index finger and the thumb formed into a letter O, with the 3 other remaining fingers on the hand, the large finger, the second finger, and the pinky finger, extended upward in a curved fashion so that it looks like the O looks like the bottom belly of the number 6, the numeral 6, and the top curled fingers look like the upraised arm of the number 6, and 3 fingers indicate 666. And that is the sign hailing the Antichrist, the one who will kill and devastate all those who are devoted to the true God and Savior, our Lord Jesus Christ. And that's coming soon.
There's a lot of the
events.
The people that are in the music industry have a lot of their music albums with they do that symbol, and they look through it with their eye, showing that they're Illuminati, the all-seeing eye. But yes, that is a very familiar hand sign. And then the other one is where they have the index finger and the pinky finger up, and the 2 middle fingers bent over with the thumb across it. And that is the Hail Satan. And also, I saw Anton LaVey on the Tonight Show before he died, and he said they used that sign and they cast a curse at people with it. They direct it at somebody, and that's how they'll cast a curse at you.
Yeah, well, that's what the Italians did going back centuries. In the old days, the Italians would do that, many of them not knowing what they were doing, Well,
you do know that is shown in a lot of the Disney cartoons also.
Oh, you're right. I mean, it's so true, and it's just rampant throughout the media, television, and I mean, we see it. It's getting so bad now. Trump puts out 666 satanic hand signs.
See, I don't watch him, so I didn't know that he was doing that, but I do not doubt it, because I did see an article about his high-end apartment there in New York City, and it has arched ceilings, and there's all kinds of satanic murals on it.
Oh, I would certainly believe that, because he's been chosen, but I don't want to offend people who are.
Yeah, well, I don't trust any of them. They're, either side, they're all players of this game.
They're all chosen. He was never an outsider. That's a lie. Ron Paul was an outsider, and you see, he was a true genuine outsider who was for the people. And you saw how they destroyed Ron Paul. They pushed.
Yeah, well, anybody that's going to get in their way aren't going to make it up to the plate to bat.
Pardon me?
I said anybody that's going to get in their way doesn't make it up to plate to bat.
Exactly. Ron Paul was a man truly for the people, and you see how they virtually pushed Ron Paul off the debate stage. They laughed at him. They ridiculed him.
Yeah,
They wouldn't
I heard that they threatened his family, too.
They caused him to get out of the election. That's what happens to anybody like Ron Paul, who's really for the people. But Trump, what a joke. I mean, he was falsely touted as an outsider, but yet he got all the publicity. That doesn't make sense, does it? The ones who get the publicity are the ones who are chosen by the diabolical ruling elite who control the mass media.
Well, I really don't believe there's going to be an election. I really do believe that we're going to have a summer of chaos. They're going to cause rioting, which you can see that's what's going on with Dallas and all these others, mass shootings. And then they're going to lock this country down with martial law, which under executive order gives Obama the right to suspend the election. Especially if they see that Hillary's going down because of they're bringing those emails back. They're bringing her back up and trying to charge her again with these emails because no one's buying the story the FBI's given us.
Well, see, here's what's happening. It's quite obvious that Hillary was set up to take a fall, okay? She was set up to take a fall and to leave Trump as the victor, the triumphant victor in this race, because Trump was chosen by the diabolical ruling elite from the very beginning, and the lie was perpetrated and permeated throughout the entire mindset of the public that, this Trump is an outsider, when in fact he was chosen by them. So Hillary was chosen to become criminally tainted, very badly tainted as a criminal. And once that happens, of course, all the votes are going to go to Trump. That's why they narrowed it down to Hillary and Trump in the first place.
Well, I think she is a criminal.
Because Hillary is criminalized, publicly criminalized, then there's no other choice but Trump.
Well, I think she is a criminal. I've done a lot of research on the folks that she has called out, and the biggest one was gassing all them children in Syria, and she had a big part on it.
Listen, she's a mass murderer. I'm agreeing with you. All I'm saying is that they put Hillary up because they knew they could knock her down because she was so guilty of so many crimes, and that was their purpose, was to put.
It's funny that we're talking about this. We got off subject, but we'll get back to it in a minute. I just want to make one last comment on it, and I call it the dog and pony show because that's what it is.
Yes. Okay. Now getting back to Planet X. Here, real quickly now, I'm going to try to shorten this article. This landmark article from the New York Times, January 1983. Remember the month, remember the year. January 1983 was when the powerful people, all the eminent astronomers and astrophysicists, showed that they were discovering this planet. Excuse me one second. Excuse me. Okay, anyway, they had discovered this planet had long been sought by the National Aeronautics and Space Agency, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, ever since, going back to the 1970s. I've got the New York Times photocopies of not just transcripts, but the actual newspaper photocopies from the New York Times 1982, June 1982, where they talk about the probe, the Pioneer 10 and 11 space probes that were sent up specifically to detect the gravitational pull of a massive body up there, which they knew was at the outer bounds of our solar system, beyond the outer bounds of Pluto. And they knew this object was there because they had detected a gravitational pull on the outer planets, forget this, for nearly 200 years. Astronomers detected anomalies in the revolutions and the rotations of these planets for ever since the early 1800s, when Neptune and Uranus were discovered. And they knew, it was obvious to any physicist or astrophysicist that when you see an object, planet revolving around the sun, and at a certain point in its revolution, it seems to take a little blip and move out, get pulled out, sort of like a runner running around a circular track, and all of a sudden he steps into a pothole on the track and stumbles a little bit. Well, that's what was happening to the outer planets, and they have detected this for nearly 200 years. So the search was on for Planet X beginning about in the early 1800s, believe it or not. And that's all stated in this New York Times article. I'm just illuminating and giving you a graphic picture of what this lengthy article states. I'll just read you the first paragraph because I know we have to conserve our time here. The article, New York Times, I have photocopied it, and I put this clear photocopy on the internet where many people can access it. It's on Marshall Masters' website, YOWUSA. Just remember the YOWUSA.com and the word New York Times. When you type in both of those terms, you'll come up with this photocopy of the New York Times article, January 1983, titled Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X by John Noble Wilford. Quote, something out there beyond the farthest reaches of the known solar system seems to be tugging at Uranus and Neptune. Some gravitational force keeps perturbing the two giant planets, causing irregularities in their orbits. The force suggests a presence far away and unseen, a large object that may be the long-sought Planet X. And that's just an introductory paragraph of that lengthy landmark New York Times article. Later on, they go on to say, and I'm going to skip across a lot of it because I already mentioned its discovery way back, its gravitational perturbations way back 200 years ago. But now they say, later on in the article, it says, quote, recent calculations by the United States Naval Observatory have confirmed the orbital perturbation exhibited by Uranus and Neptune, which Dr. Thomas C. Van Flandern, an astronomer at the observatory, says could be explained by, quote, a single undiscovered planet, unquote. He and a colleague, Dr. Robert Harrington, who many believe was murdered because he was going public, Dr. Van Flandern and Dr. Robert Harrington calculate that the 10th planet should be 2 to 5 times more massive than Earth and have a highly elliptical orbit that takes it some 5 billion miles beyond that of Pluto. Now get this is a key thing if you study it and understand what they're saying. This proves that Planet X is now being pulled in by our sun. They say it's 5 billion miles beyond that of Pluto, hardly next door, but still within the gravitational influence of the sun, unquote. That means it's being pulled in by the sun. It was at the outer fringes of the sun's gravitational force field, and it was pulled in then, and the closer it gets pulled in, the greater the gravitational force pulling in on the object, so it begins to accelerate. As it gets closer into our solar system, it accelerates. However, I'm going to give you my own understanding of it so you can see why hasn't this object come in sooner? Why did it take 30-some years for it to be, well, it was discovered 30-some years, and it still hasn't destroyed Earth yet gravitationally. The reason is I'm going to try to give you a visual picture because paint a picture with words to let you see exactly what's happening. Visualize yourself in a restaurant with a big circular table, and on this the kind you typically see in a restaurant. And on the table, in the center of the table, is a lamp, a bright lamp, which represents the sun. And placed closest to the lamp at the center might be a small object such as a cranberry, which might represent the planet Mercury. And then a little further away from the center of the table, you might place another object such as a grape, which might represent Venus, and then maybe further out a walnut, which is slightly larger, representing planet Earth, and so on, until you get out to Jupiter, which could be represented by a huge grapefruit placed further out on that table. And, of course, the planets Uranus and Neptune would be represented by some other objects closer to the edge of the table. Now, this table, imagine this table revolving very slowly, just as our planets revolve around the sun. And imagine that you're on the floor, offset, not directly under the table, but off to the side of the table, and you fire say a slingshot with a ball bearing. Now that ball bearing represents planet X being pulled in by our sun. And that ball bearing is fired from the floor up toward the underside of the table. Now, as it's going up, it's going to be going at an angle now. As you can probably visualize that, getting closer and closer to the underside of the table. Now, what happens when this ball bearing, which is planet X, gets below the center of the table? It's going to gravitationally influence our sun more than ever, and it's going to gravitationally influence the inner planets, which are near the sun, more than ever before. However, as this ball bearing continues to travel toward the underside of the table, it's now going farther away from the center. And it's looping. It's going to actually crash through the underside of the table. Or maybe, let's say, it doesn't even crash through the underside of the table. It goes beyond the table and begins to loop up and around, up to adjacent to the side of the table, and then over the top of the table. It's sort of a crazy analogy, but it's pretty vivid if you can visualize it. You can see it pretty vividly. So this ball bearing then comes up over the top of the table. So what's happening to the gravitational pull of this exerted by this object on the sun and planet Earth? Well, it's decreasing. It's diminishing. It's going into a waning influence on planet Earth and the sun, because it has to loop around way out beyond the outer bounds of the solar system. But yet it's becoming more ominous, because this object is coming up now and level with, even with all the planets in our solar system, I should say shoulder to shoulder with the outer planets Uranus and Neptune. So now it's going to influence those outer planets more, and we see that influence occurring now, many, many years after the great disasters of the first decade, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008. There were many disasters, many major earthquakes, and yet these disasters began to diminish from, say, 2008, 2009 until the present, 2016. That's because this object was going further out. So you can see that people do not understand when they become skeptical and say, well, how come this planet hasn't come in yet? It was supposed to be destroying the Earth, and yet the disasters still haven't intensified that much. But now we see them intensifying because it's looping around. In other words, it's just as the article says here. I'm going to quote again from the New York Times, January 1983, Dr. Robert Harrington. It has a highly elliptical orbit. That's what Dr. Harrington said. And the elliptical, again, let me give you another analogy. Visualize a picture of the outline of a fish head, not the entire fish's body, but say just a fish head, right? That outline of the fish head profile might represent the elliptical path taken by this planet X. And the eye of the fish would represent the sun. So the sun is the gravitational body that is pulling on this object and pulling it in, but when it overshoots, going toward the mouth of the fish, more or less, in its travel path, it overshoots, and now the sun has to pull it back. And what's going to happen to it? It's going to decrease in its velocity. It's going to decelerate. It has to decelerate because the Earth, the sun, which was accelerating it toward the sun, is now, we've seen it overshoot the sun, and now the sun has to pull back on it, causing it to decelerate. And the overall effect is that it gradually makes a sharp turn, a looping turn, just like a truck would make. A huge truck barreling down the highway would have to jam on its brakes and make a much slower turn around a big jug handle turn in order to prevent the truck from tipping over. So that's what happens. It's making a huge U-turn right now. And now we're seeing the disasters intensify. We're seeing greater Earth disturbances. And it's getting really bad. It's getting severe. The floods are intensifying all over the world. They were bad back in the middle part of this past decade. Now we're into the second decade of the 21st century. And now in the midst of that second decade, things are getting worse again because the planet is looping around. And I expect over the coming months and years, I don't know, I'm not going to set dates. Only God knows the dates. But it's gradually getting worse and worse and worse.
This is what I think, John. I really do feel that it's going to be a gradual thing. But, we are seeing a lot of earth changes, and especially flooding in China, in Germany, in France. I mean, and I don't think these people realize what's happening. Do you?
They are stunned. Now, if you watch the Weather Channel and you study the Weather Channel, you have to study it. But the Weather Channel,
I do. I watch it every morning.
Good. It probably has the best overall analysis of what's happening around the world weather-wise, because it's the only station that tells you what's happening around the world. If you look at a local microcosm of just, say, Texas weather alone, you could see that's going crazy. First, we had a drought. We had the worst drought in history in Texas in 2015, I believe. Now, 2016, it automatically flip-flopped from the worst, most severe drought in history to the worst, most severe flooding in history in a matter of weeks and months.
I'll give you a quick synopsis of something that I read on China today, and the heavy rain and flooding, and it's called the Big Wobble. And what they're talking about is the wobble of our planet, how it's affecting it. Actually, the last flood, there was 128 dead, 1.34 million people evacuated, and 41,000 houses destroyed.
Oh, my goodness. 41,000 houses. Oh, my goodness.
So that's just one article. I mean, I have gone through thousands of videos and articles of what's going on with our planet. I saw one of the floods that was going on in Japan, where all the cars were being washed into a circle in front of this apartment complex, and they were being dunked under, and actually one of the cars bobbed up, and a man rolled the window down and got out and got on the roof, and I thought, oh, my God, the chances of him getting out of that is, like, very slim, very slim. And then houses were falling down the hills and crashing on top of other houses and just smashing the smithereens. And another thing that's happening is there's a lot of mudslides. There's a lot of the sides of mountains and that are just breaking loose and just crumbling down with tons of debris and dirt. Some of it's going on houses. Some of it's going on roads with cars. I mean, this is all happening like all at once, and I really do believe that these are the effects of what's coming at our planet.
Yes, definitely. Earth's core is heating up, and it's disturbing. We have like a lava lamp effect. This is just one of the many phenomena, macrocosmic geophysical phenomena that I'm referring to here. I've talked about this relating in 2010. I talked about this on various shows relating to the Gulf oil spill. And I've always said, and a couple people were murdered because of this. A couple high-level people were murdered because they were talking about how bad that this Gulf oil spill was just a big cover-up what was happening was there was geological disasters, cracks in the seafloor beneath the Gulf of Mexico. This was back in 2010 when Matthew Simmons, high-level man, Illuminati or Freemason anyway, and member of the oil industrialist, the oil industry executive. Matthew Simmons spoke on Fox News and said, that leak that you see is really just a phony leak. The big leak is the entire floor you see for hundreds of miles. There's cracks in the floor, and then he was murdered after that. He died in his drowned. Yeah, he drowned in his jacuzzi a couple of days later because he was beginning to talk. So we see upheavals in the seafloor of the Gulf of Mexico. And I was talking about that in 2010 and saying that it's related. It's being caused by these lava lamp effects, what I called lava lamp effects. When you turn on the light bulb in a lava lamp, and all that lava that is normally in a cold condition settled at the bottom of the cylindrical lamp begins to rise up because of the heat. And that demonstrates on a small scale, it's a wonderful model of what is occurring in the Earth when the Earth's core, molten iron core, molten metal core, mostly iron, begins to heat up. It's like a pot of food, actually. It's quite logical and understandable, and you can visualize how food would bubble up once as the heat is applied to the burner. And that's what's happening to the molten metal. It's pushing upward, and the Earth's deep within the Earth's core, and it's pushing up on the mantle, which is molten rock, very, very deep, many hundreds of miles deep beneath the Earth's crust. And that molten rock that gets pushed up like a lava lamp, like a lava column, is coming up and it's expanding. And it's like and then it begins to expand even more when it gets to the top because now it's seeing a release in pressure. There's less pressure. So it begins to bubble up and expand in volume. And what are you going to have? You're going to have a breaking of the crust of the Earth. You're going to see lots of magma being ejected in the form of volcanoes, gases. Methane gas is also a part of that, and we're seeing tremendous methane gas leaks that are coming up. In fact, the energy companies are tapping into a lot of this methane gas. They're not talking about it, but they're tapping into all this additional methane gas that's rising up through the ocean seafloors. And we see it happen, and also on the land surfaces, methane rising up, crazy phenomena occurring as a result of this methane gas. So we know that the lava lamp effect is occurring. We see sinkholes now increasing, and massive sinkholes with cars and houses being swallowed up in these sinkholes. Why? Because the Earth is breaking up. The surface of the Earth is expanding because of the heat. Just like if you imagine the Earth as a huge ball of chocolate, say, okay, and you have somehow you inject a little flame in the center of that huge chocolate ball. It's going to heat up and melt the chocolate, and it's going to rise up and bubble up eventually. And pretty soon that chocolate ball is going to become a molten mass. Incidentally, speaking of molten masses, this is the dream I had number of years ago. I woke up, sat up instantaneously at 3 o'clock in the morning in the midst of a nightmare. Well, it was a prophetic dream, I believe, where I had been thinking in my mind to God, what is this lake of fire really all about? What is this lake of fire where everybody throughout the world who chooses to defy God's beckoning call for mercy, everybody, China, in Korea, and in Africa, and in Europe, and Asia, all those people who defy God's beckoning call for mercy will go into the lake of fire. How big must this lake of fire be? And I realized in the dream that it was the entire Earth. With the entire Earth, I saw it in my dream, enveloped in flaming lava. And that's logically what a physicist would expect to see as the Earth gets heated up more and more with this imaginary gas burner that I'm talking about, this flame burner at the center of Earth's of the Earth, which continues to heat up the entire surrounding ball of Earth to the point where magma just oozes out and overflows and envelops the entire surface of the Earth. That's the lake of fire. That's what it will be. Now, God says those who are devoted to God in their mind, and all we have to do is devote ourselves to God in our thoughts, contemplate God's invisible presence. I've made that acronym up because I harp on it so much. I'm spiritually compelled to try to preach this to people. I don't want to use the word preach, but try to urge people to consciously contemplate. Well, CGIP is what I call it. Contemplate God's invisible presence. You don't talk to God because our human minds are too weak to carry on our daily affairs and do what we're doing at the same time. Pray to God. God commands us. God, the Savior, commands us to pray always that we may be accounted worthy to escape all these disasters that are coming upon the earth and to stand before the Son of Man in judgment and to pass through that judgment, pass over that judgment. Well, how can we do it? We don't have the minds to be saying prayers to God, and we don't know what to say to God, and He's the one that teaches us, and we don't teach Him. He's the one that talks to us, and we don't talk to Him. So let us just contemplate God's presence. And I've been doing that, trying to do that daily. I get inspirations, and I get ideas, I think, that come from God, and you will too. So this is what I'm urging everyone to do. You will be saved from the lake of fire, which is the ultimate destiny of planet Earth until the Earth is renewed. This is in the book of Revelation, and also in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 54, somewhere around there. 1 Corinthians 15:54, somewhere around there, where he says that we will be taken up in a twinkling of an eye at the last trump. That's when the earth goes into total self-destruction. We will be taken up in a twinkling of an eye. Well, how could that happen? It cannot happen if your body has mass. As a physicist would tell you, if your body has mass, you cannot go upward into the third heaven in a twinkling of an eye because the mass is too great. You cannot accelerate to those speeds. But if you're the spirit of your body, which is energy, like electricity or magnetism, which is essentially the composition of our spirit, I believe. Our spirit is something that's intangible. Our soul, that can be transmitted like electricity. Now, we know that radio waves are transmitted at the speed of light. We know that light is transmitted at the speed of light. All these radio waves, light, are all a form of electromagnetic energy. Just different frequencies on that spectrum. That's all it is. But light and radio waves and the high frequencies that are transmitted by cell phones and also the higher frequencies that are transmitted by NASA satellites and all that other stuff, they're all forms, different frequencies, and the entire spectrum of the electromagnetic energy. So that's how we'll be transmitted upward at the speed of light. At the last trump, just before the lava envelops Earth and everyone remaining who defies God's plea to come to Him for safety. Everyone on Earth will be burned to death. Fire. 2 Peter, the book of 2 Peter chapter 3 says, the earth will melt with fervent heat. It will be destroyed by fire. And that's the volcanic lava that will envelop Earth. But if you spiritually devote yourself, you will be your spirit, your soul will be transmitted upward. Okay, this is
now you talk of the electromagnetic energy. As this planet comes closer to the sun, it will affect our sun with coronal tears. We just had one a few days ago, and that means solar flares will be hitting our planet. This is way before we go through the shift, which is why we're seeing a lot of the effects right now with the earthquakes, and a lot of the jet stream has changed. Do you think, John, that we're kind of wobbling right now?
Yeah, we're beginning to go into a wobble. And I wrote a long dissertation on this, going back to, I think it was 2008 or 2013 was when I first wrote it. And then I began to develop it more and revise it and add more information and then make it more clarify it. But the initial dissertation I had posted on to many people who didn't understand it. I guess I better start posting it to the scientific groups, people who can really appreciate it. And that concept was this, since 2013, that the Earth's core, solid metal inner core, is off-center. Now, this is a very important concept, and I'll try to reduce it to something understandable and limit the time that I spend speaking about it. But inside the core, scientists will tell you, and I've read up on this, that there are two components to Earth's core. First, the smallest component and deepest at the center of the Earth is a solid metal ball. Who knows how big it is? It could be the size of, I think I've read it was the size of a small planet, and out surrounding that small ball is liquid metal, mostly iron. It's a chamber. It's a circular, a spherical chamber, actually, in which this solid metal ball floats around inside this spherical chamber of molten metal. So the solid metal ball inside at the very center is called the inner core, and the chamber of liquid metal surrounding the inner core is called the outer core. Inner core, outer. Inner core solid, outer core molten. And then surrounding that outer core is very deep, very thick, many hundreds of miles deep magma, which is molten rock. What's happening now is the Earth, and I got this concept originally from a psychic. This guy, Carl McBrayer, was a man uneducated, but he had psychic insights. And I've got to look for that audio tape that I allowed him to record through my telephone one day, giving me his whole explanation. But he said the Earth's core is off center, and then I started looking at it. I said, yeah, he's probably right, even though he doesn't have a scientific understanding of it. He's right. The Earth's core, solid metal core, has been pulled off center, and I know why. From the solar blasts that were chronically directed toward Earth from the sun over these first decade of the 21st century. The sun was in a state of hyperactivity for most of that time due to this object electrically exciting, this incoming planet X electrically exciting the sun, as specifically as is incoming dwarf star, planet X, was passing beneath that table. Remember I mentioned the circular table? It was passing, going upward toward the underside of the table, but passing directly beneath the sun. At that time, it caused the sun to go into a prolonged period of high excitation, solar flares, coronal mass ejections, and these electrical streams it's like a sneeze. It's like a solar sneeze, where lots of tiny little particles of saliva are vaporized or atomized. When a person sneezes, if you've ever seen a slow motion picture of someone sneezing, that's what it looks like, atomized particles of liquid. Well, they visualize something like that in the form of the sun sneezing out. Electrons and protons, these electrically charged particles, both electrons and protons, in all directions. Why? Because it's being electrically excited with zapping, actually, by incoming planet X soaring in beneath the sun, which occurred, as I said, around the first half of the first decade of the 21st century. And that sun kept on spewing out these streams, waves of protons and electrons, electrically charged particles. And we know that from basic physics that charged particles in motion will will create an electromagnetic field around the stream of charged particles. So if you have charged particles going in like a bullet-like fashion, that bullet of charged particles, electrons and protons, will generate sort of a wake around it, like a boat creates a wake, when cutting through the water at high speed. Well, there's a wake of air also from a bullet. If you see a slow motion picture of a bullet traveling, there's a wake of air surrounding the bullet. Well, likewise, similarly, there's a wake of electromagnetic energy, actual concentric, cylindrical, spring-like, spiral-like electromagnetic field that is generated by traveling electric particles. So imagine a sneeze of these billions of sprayed out electrified particles sneezed out by the sun constantly over and over for days and weeks and months at hyperactive rates, causing the streams of particles to blast throughout in all directions, not only toward Earth, but in all directions around the sun and outward, and striking Earth's magnetic field. They're going to cause conflicting magnetic interactions with our Earth's magnetic field. And you have this, what I call magnetic jousting between the solar blasts that are hitting Earth and Earth's magnetic field. And that's why Earth's magnetic field is deteriorating, because it's being jousted and batted back and forth by these high solar winds that are incurring into our Earth's magnetic field surrounding the Earth, which surrounds the Earth like a massive balloon. Well, that balloon, the magnetic field, is feeling all these electromagnetic blasts and incursions. And as a result, that energy that is being transmitted by this sneezing electrified solar particles, that magnetic field, the magnetic energy coming from the sun is being fed back, and this happens in electricity. When you have a transformer, this is called basic transformer action, where the one coil of wire is placed next to another coil of wire, and you have a transmission of an electromagnetic field generated by one coil of wire being coupled into the adjacent coil of wire. So now you have electromagnetic energy coupled, even though the two coils are not physically connected. This is called transformer action, and this is how a transformer operates. Well, the same kind of action occurs with Earth's magnetic field when these solar electrified and electromagnetically created fields from the solar blast impact the Earth's magnetic field. They're fed back not only into the surrounding balloon around the Earth, which is the Earth's magnetic field, but that feeds directly into the core of the Earth, just like the skin of an apple would appear to feed down into the center of the apple, coming from around the skin of the apple, around the surface, and then appearing to funnel into the dimple at the top of the apple and into the core of the apple. That's what the kind of effect that you have with this energy feeding into the core at the very center of Earth, that solid metal core. Now, what does that do to it? What does that do to the Earth's solid metal core? It pushes it, because now you have magnetic energy laterally presenting forces on the inner core, causing it to go off center. Now you have a tremendous devastating effect on the entire planet, because now this this solid metal core floating within it, the outer spherical molten iron chamber, that center solid metal ball is being pushed off center, and now it's beginning to revolve, whereas before it just rotated. And a rotation is nice because it causes minimal disturbance of the liquid, as the swirling liquid. Earth's outer metal molten core is swirling. It has to swirl because Earth is rotating. So as Earth rotates, it causes a swirling effect, just like a bowl of water placed on a potter's wheel. And as that potter's wheel spins, what happens to the bowl of water sitting atop the potter's wheel? Well, the water begins to swirl also, but in a nice smooth fashion, forming a vortex at the center. However, suppose someone comes along and jostles that, puts the side of the potter's wheel and causes a disturbance. Now the water which was previously swirling smoothly inside the bowl of water on the rotating potter's wheel begins to make waves and become turbulent. That's what's happening because this solid metal core has been shifted off center by these magnetic impulses impacting the Earth over a period of years coming from the sun. And now the Earth is off center. It's going to be off balance, just like a Mexican jumping bean. And now it's going to begin to wobble. But it creates that magnetic field created by the swirling molten metal outer core is what creates the jet stream. And the jet stream used to be, no one else is talking about this. And hopefully I think other people are picking up on it. But the jet stream is created by that previously smooth motion of the swirling outer molten metal core. That's why our jet stream used to be smooth, and that's why we used to have moderate weather with the jet stream approximating if you can visualize the United States-Canadian border, which is nice and horizontal basically, and that's what the jet stream used to look like. And when you have a smooth jet stream, you have nice, moderate, pleasant weather without any great disturbances. But once that you begin to cause waves and disturbances in the molten outer core of the Earth, that molten outer core contour of turbulence is transmitted, and I won't go into the details of how it's transmitted, but it creates a jet stream which is congruently turbulent and wavy like a roller coaster. And that roller coaster jet stream, even the Weather Channel meteorologists know and tell you that it's that roller coaster jet stream that causes all this harsh weather, violent weather, because you have clashing at like the roller coaster going up and down. And
I noticed that too, John, on the Weather Channel, that they're mostly in the middle of the United States. They're showing that jet stream going up and down, up and down.
And it's been going up and down ever since 2004, when I started videotaping the violent weather events that started occurring, believe it or not, 12 years ago. I have videotapes, 6-hour videotapes, whole stacks of them in my basement, of all the highlights of all the disastrous weather that's been occurring since 2004. And even though I did not typically videotape the jet stream, I can tell you from my frequent observations, it's embedded in my memory how that jet stream started out like a series of mountains. Or you know what a sine wave? I think most people know what a sine wave is. It looks like a series of mountains, hills that are all the same peak amplitude, and it just goes up and down and up, like a roller coaster essentially, a symmetrical roller coaster with symmetrical ups and downs. Well, that's how the jet stream used to be in 2004, which in itself was very anomalous because, as I said, the jet stream was supposed to be horizontal, but it began to wave up and down. However, back in 2004, the waves were not that intense. The amplitude was not that great. They were small waves. They did not, the peaks and troughs of these waves that would come in from the Pacific Ocean, which the Weather Channel called the Pineapple Express, these waves that would come in from west to east, from the Hawaii and go into the west coast, these waves of the jet stream, and then the waves would travel across from west to east through the United States, all the way across from the west coast to the east coast in about a day or two. Those waves were not that great in amplitude. Why? Because Earth's core at that time in 2004 had not been severely pushed off center that much. Now, as Earth's core goes more and more away from the center, the metal inner core, it begins to revolve with larger and larger circular motion and causing a greater and greater disturbance in the molten metal outer core, thus causing a congruently greater and greater amplitude of excursions, north-south excursions in our jet stream, consequently causing a greater and greater intensity and ferocity of storms in the United States and around the world. And that's a long explanation of a very important subject that no one's talking about, no one seems to know about. We need to know that the Earth's core is indeed off center, and there's going to be a wobble. The wobble must intensify. God promises that wobble will intensify in the book of Isaiah chapter 24, verse 20. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard. That's what God said to Isaiah in the Hebrew tongue, in the Hebrew language. I shall make the earth reel to and fro like a drunkard. This was around 600 BC. Well, that has not happened yet since 600 BC, but it appears to be happening now. And then God says it will become even worse. In the next phrase, God said to Isaiah, after it reels to and fro like a drunkard, then earth will nod like a hammock. Now, I'm giving you the words, the actual words that were in the Hebrew, because I looked them up and studied those words in the Strong's Concordance of the Hebrew language. So there is a mistranslation in the King James English version of the Hebrew language, which mistakenly says, the earth shall be removed like a cottage. That is a wrong, erroneous translation by the King James's English translators. The actual Hebrew, if you go back to the Strong's Concordance of the Hebrew language, it states that God says, I will make the earth reel to and fro like a drunkard, and then make earth nod like a hammock. Now, take a hammock, the backyard hammock. Everyone has seen one. It's like a little canvas bed. It has two tie ropes at the end. Each end ties to an upright, like a tree or an upright post, so that you can lie down in it. You have a swinging bed. Essentially, it's like a swinging bed. Well, it says earth will nod like a hammock. The word nod, if you look it up in a dictionary, means a vertical motion, such as when you nod your head, you're signifying the word yes. When you shake your head back and forth, you're signifying the word no. So nodding is a vertical motion. This is very clear, distinct language from God. I will make God says, I will make the earth nod like a hammock. If you put a model globe of the earth into a hammock and pull the hammock back and beginning to swing the hammock, what happens when you pull it back? The north pole of that globe was pointing sideways, is pointing toward you, sort of. So the north pole is in the position of the equator. Now, as you swing the hammock in slow motion, the hammock begins to go forward, swing forward. Now that north pole, which was at the equator point, begins to vertically rotate upward to its normal position. And the equator, which was at the beginning pointing downward toward the south pole, that equator likewise rotates upward towards its normal position. Well, if it nods back and forth like that, you can see that the North Pole can go either way, can go down, rotate vertically down toward the equator. And the North Pole can become the equator. And the equator can become the South Pole and the North Pole. Now that's the extreme example of the earth nodding like a hammock, as God has vowed in Isaiah chapter 24. That's an extreme case. It doesn't have to go that. It doesn't have to. Earth does not have to nod vertically to that extent, that many degrees. But even partially, well, we have evidence that this occurred in the past, thousands of years ago. And I have in my video documentary of dramatization of this discovery in the Siberia by the Russians in Siberia, going back maybe 3-4 decades ago, even longer, where 40 or more of these massive ancient mammoths. The mammoths are like the woolly mammoths, like huge, gigantic elephant types of animals with long, curved tusks. We've all seen pictures of the ancient, extinct woolly mammoth. Those mammoths were found, embedded, buried in tens of feet of ice in the Siberian tundra by Russians And when scientists dissected them, they found in their stomachs and in their mouths, they found tropical vegetation. There's no way that could happen. Tropical vegetation being eaten by mammoths who are now frozen in and around the North Pole. Well, the only way that could happen is if the Earth toppled vertically in space, such that that tropical equatorial region where the mammoths originally were suddenly, in a matter of hours, rotated vertically up to a position which put it at the top of the Earth.
Yeah, it said that they didn't even know what hit them.
They were standing up. They
didn't even know what, John, I want to ask you, why do you think that we are not being told that this is going to happen? Is there, why are they going to such extent to hide this? Because
obviously,
I do believe it ties in with the third secret of Fatima, and I want to touch on that a little bit.
Okay. Well, obviously, the people in power, they want to retain their power. These are greedy people. And they were like in The Wizard of Oz. Remember The Wizard of Oz, where at the very end we found out that the real wizard was some old guy who was scared, pot-belly old man who was seeking power by deceiving the people. And making people believe that he was some fearsome monster. Well, the Wizard of Oz is these pot-belly, old, dirty old men who want to control the world. And they know that they will lose control when their masses of people of all nations begin to realize that there is a power more fearsome than their ruling elite. A power that is so great, and that is the power of God, who is bringing this destruction, because God has vowed this. We have to know that this is not just a phenomenon that's occurring as a result of some kind of physical effects and some kind of hapless event where a dwarf star got sucked in gravitationally to our solar system. This is not just a hapless event. This is an event created by a massive entity, a being so great and powerful, one who has created all of us and created the astounding reality which we know as planet Earth, balanced perfectly in the midst of the solar system, giving us a climate that is so ideal that we could survive in it at just a delicate distance from the Earth, where we will neither freeze nor be melted, be scorched. There's a great entity. There's great intelligence behind this design of the solar system, and there's great intelligence behind the design of the human body. It's so fantastic. It's obvious. So now we see that there's a great entity is creating this. There's a power. That's the power that far exceeds the power of these dirty old men who are scared, and they want to kill off most of the Earth because they know the only way they can avoid being hung and torn to pieces, as Mussolini, the dictator, was torn to pieces by the Italian people at the end of the Second World War. The only way they can prevent being torn to pieces by the people is to exterminate most of the people on Earth, leaving just a small minority to be their servants. And they have sworn this. I'm not making this up. This is not my interpretation. This is their own vow in stone at the Georgia Guidestones in Georgia, where anyone could see it. You go to YouTube, you can see these massive guidestones that were created at the expense of millions of dollars, in 8 languages. So they are announcing this to the world in 8 different languages, including the Swahili language. They state that we will reduce the population of Earth down to 500,000. Well, there are nearly 7 million people on Earth. So what they're saying is we will exterminate 13 out of every 14 human beings on the face of the Earth. That's what these dirty old men are planning to do in order to maintain their power and keep...
And this is why they aren't telling anybody, because if somebody educates themselves about what's going to happen and being around the coastlines is one of the worst places to be because of the tsunamis, and that's where most of the population is. This way they wipe out most of the people.
Exactly. And you bring me to the third secret of Fatima. I'm going to read this. This what happened, and there's the Pope Pius. I'm going to give you the bottom line here, and then they're going to be scratching your head wondering, what's he talking about? Pope Pius XII, there's evidence that he was murdered. Pope Pius XII, who reigned during the late 1950s, there's evidence that he was murdered. I had spoken to someone who was a Catholic scholar within the clergy, and this was a number of years ago. He told me that, first of all, Sister Lucia, which is one of the, well, I'm getting off too far away. I'll get back onto that, the third secret here in a minute. But Pope Pius XII read the third secret of Fatima, which was a prophecy given by God to three girls in 1917 in the town of Fatima, Portugal. And these three girls went into a trance, and only two of them died very soon from the great massive swine flu epidemic that occurred back in 1917, 18, 1920, and one survived. Sister Lucia survived. Well, these girls got this vision from the angel of God, and there were three secrets that they went to the church. The church evidently sequestered these girls and made them forced them to become silent, and they wrote down, recorded these three prophecies that were given by the angel of God to the three girls. Typically, very often, you see God gives his messages to innocents, like babes, like God tells you in the Bible. He has given this wisdom to babes and withheld it from the wise. You read that in the Bible, because babes are the ones who are innocent and trust God and believe in God, and they have no doubt. They're not doubting people. Well, anyway, these innocent girls got this message from God, and the third secret was the critical one that had been kept secret, and the vow from the church was that we will reveal this third secret to the public in the year 1960. They put it way, way into the future because they didn't want to take responsibility for putting it out. Just like they say, oh, we'll tell you about the Kennedy assassination, all this evidence we've gathered, we'll tell you in the year 2020. Well, that was way back in 1963 they said that, because they knew they would all be dead by 2020 and held unaccountable. Anyway, the third secret was coming at close to 1960, and there was a tremendous fervor among the Catholic masses of the world to hear that third secret. And people were talking about, pretty soon the Pope is going to reveal the third secret of Fatima. But it never happened. In 1957 or 59, Pope Pius XII died. Here's what I was told by this Catholic scholar. That this came from, originally, the secret information came from the secretary to Pope Pius XII. The secretary was an American priest named Father Richard Hughes, H-E-W-E-S. Father Hughes stated that in the presence of Father Hughes, the Pope Pius XII's secretary, and in the presence of Cardinal Stritch, S-T-R-I-C-H, and in the presence of Cardinal Ottaviani, O-T-T-A-V-I-A-N-I, the Pope opened the third secret letter and read it to those people. And for 2 weeks, Father Hughes says, for 2 weeks, the Pope wept bitterly. And what happened? He died. It's probably killed because he was going to reveal it to the world. And if you reveal a secret like that, you cause tremendous upheaval in the economic markets and disturb the power structure of the ruling elite. So they will not let this happen. I've got a copy in front of me now of from the website, let's see, Fatima.org, Fatima.org /third secret /Fulda, F-U-L-D-A. You can just go to Fatima.org, and here's what I copied. Got a printout of it. The Fatima Network. Published testimony. Pope John Paul II in Fulda, Germany, in the year 1980. The October 1981 issue of the German magazine, I'm going to try to pronounce this German name of this German magazine. The October 1981 issue of the German magazine Stimme des Glaubens reported on a discussion that Pope John Paul II had with a select group of German Catholics in November of 1980. The following is a verbatim report of the discussion. The Holy Father was asked, "What about the third secret of Fatima?" This was 1981. Should it not have already been published by 1960? And the Pope answered, quote, "Given the seriousness of the contents, my predecessors in the Patrine office diplomatically preferred to postpone publication so as not to encourage the world power of communism to make certain moves." Well, that was the cover story, okay? That was the cover that everybody was told, oh yeah, it was communism was going to make certain moves. They had to create a phony third secret to appease the people. Okay, but now he goes on and he slips and gives us the real secret following it. First he said we didn't want to encourage communism to make certain moves. Then he goes on to spill the beans and tell you the real truth. Quote, "On the other hand, the Pope said, it should be sufficient for all Christians to know this. If there is a message in which it is written that the oceans will flood whole areas of the earth, and that from one moment to the next, millions of people will perish, truly the publication of such a message is no longer something to be so much desired." Unquote. That the oceans will flood whole areas of the earth, and from one moment to the next, millions of people will perish, the Pope said, Pope John Paul II. So we got to the secret prophecy from God. Now, prophecy is such an important aspect of this subject of Planet X and the coming destruction of planet Earth and the human race. Prophecy is so important. The prophecy of the third secret of Fatima, the girls at Fatima in Portugal, 1917, and also the girls at Garabandal, Spain in 1964. The four sisters, Mary Lowly, I'm trying to remember the names. But anyway, I've got it all on videotape, the dramatization of it. These four girls were out in the orchard in 1964. They were young girls, 10 years old and younger, stealing apples. It was a bright, sunny day, as Mary Lowly recounts in this videotaped interview with her, one of the girls, now an adult. And she says, we were just picking apples, and all of a sudden, it was bright sunny sky, and all of a sudden there was a boom like thunder, but there was no clouds or anything. And suddenly, after this loud boom occurred in the sky, incidentally, you've heard the loud boom occurring when the Apostle Paul was knocked to the ground by God, the Savior, the Son of God, in the book of Acts. And Paul was knocked to the ground, and a loud boom was heard. Well, when God speaks, that's what you get sometimes, a loud boom. And the angel of God spoke to these girls. These girls, one of them, she fell to her knees, and her eyes rolled up and upward in her head as if she were in a trance. She fell to her knees very abruptly and sharply, forcefully, but yet she was not injured. And all the other girls became scared when they saw this one of their friends fall to her knees this way, and they ran to call their mother. But no sooner did they escape by a few steps until they themselves fell to the ground. And they later, after this experience, they came back running to their mothers, excitedly saying that we have seen the angel. And when they got back, they explained that the angel was spoken to them. And one night, I guess this happened over and repeatedly. And when they would visit the angel, and actual films were taken. I've seen some of the films in this drama, which was produced by ABC Television. I have the drama itself. It was a high-profile, prime program titled Ancient Prophecies on ABC TV back in 1995. Anyway, they show films of it, the girls, in what's called an ecstasy. They were in a trance. They would go into the trance every time the angels would speak to them. Now, they didn't recount all the various things that were said to them by the angel, but this one night, the girl said they got this impression, this intuitive feeling that the people must not follow us. We must be left alone when the angel visits us for some reason. So they were not allowed to be followed by the crowds of people. And what occurred is the girls went into what they call ecstasy or a trance, and they began screaming in horror. And that night was called a night of screams. And in that night of screams, what they revealed was that all the motors, all electric motors on planet Earth will cease to operate. Now, that sounds kind of crazy, crazy prophecy. And the second thing was that there would be such a great heat would come upon the world that people would attempt to kill one another because of this great heat. So I figured out what it was, and I wrote a long dissertation on it, which Alexander Bachman had published. He found it so intriguing that he published it, and I can probably get Alexander to give us his publication of this email that I had sent out to him and others about a year or so ago, explaining what was the meaning behind these two prophecies, that all the electric motors on Earth would cease to operate, and secondly, there would become such a great heat that people would attempt to kill one another. Well, if you look back at what Nikola Tesla and Guglielmo Marconi, the Italian physicist, did, they were able to actually cause motors to cease at a distance by putting out such a tremendous magnetic field that, hold on a second, please. Okay, I'm sorry. That Marconi actually demonstrated, and this is in Nikola Tesla's book, I believe, titled The Fantastic Inventions of Nikola Tesla by Nikola Tesla. And in the book, I believe, I have the book here, I have to check it out. He says that when Adolf Hitler, who was very powerful in the 1930s, came to visit his ally, Benito Mussolini, in Italy, his German ships docked in Naples, Italy harbor. And as a demonstration of his power, Marconi actually disabled all the motors in the German ships, all the electrical devices in the German ships, and showed what they were able to do. Well, how did they do it?
And this is supposed to happen because of the electrical charge they're hitting our planet from the sun?
Yes. You see, what would happen, and I visualize this happening. When this object comes in, this object is engulfed in plasma. Plasma is electrified gases, which are absorbed, picked up by this incoming dwarf star as it penetrates the outer bounds of our solar system. And way beyond the outer bounds of our solar system is what I call the gateway or the doorway, where actually the spherical shield around our solar system that is called the heliosphere. And that plasma is generated by the expulsion and emission of solar blasts day after day, year after year. Solar blasts of mostly, protons are the ones that really travel farther, because protons have a much greater, or positive, electrically positive charged particles, which have a much greater mass, even though they're microscopic, than the electrons. But they both have equal charge. One, the proton is positive electrical charge, equal in magnitude to the negative electric charge of the electron. However, the mass, the physical mass of the proton is greater, so when it gets hit, just like you would hit a baseball, if you have two baseballs to bat out, you have one of them is one of those spongy wiffle balls, and the other is a regulation Major League hardball, and you hit each one with equal force, which one will travel farther? Hardball or the sponge ball?
Well, the hardball.
Hardball, why? Because the hardball has more mass. Well, even though the impact is going to be greater because of its density, but it has more mass, and therefore, the basic laws of physics that kinetic energy is equal to 1/2 mass times the velocity squared of a body. So if you have greater mass, then you're going to have a greater kinetic energy. Anyway, so that's what happens with the protons. They get really blasted out when the
So I don't think people realize, John, if all electrical motors quit, the devastation that will happen on this planet. For instance, that means all airplanes that are in the air are just going to drop out of the sky.
Yeah, right, and all the satellites too. So when this object comes in, it penetrates that what you visualize, a glowing red sphere that surrounds the entire solar system like a glass ball. But it's only difference is that this object is glowing red. I visualize it pictorially as glowing red, positive electric charges, plasma, which is mostly these protons, positively electric particles. And as it comes in, the particles stick to this object, just as when you go to open up a package that comes to you by Federal Express, and you open up the package and they use these styrofoam peanuts. Do you ever see these white styrofoam peanuts? What happens? They stick to your hands like glue. And right? Isn't it true? I mean, you can't get them off your hands. You have to shake your hand just to get them off of it. Well, that's all caused by static electric charge. That static charge is what resides and comprises the heliosphere surrounding the entire solar system. So when this object pierces the spherical heliosphere, it becomes engulfed with this sticky electrical plasma, just like a bee flying into a huge bubblegum bubble. That bee would become engulfed, saturated with bubblegum. And as it comes in, it would pull a whole strand of bubblegum with it, penetrating into the solar system. And that's the tail of a comet. That's the same electrical effect would create the tail of a comet. And this object comes in like a comet, glowing red, engulfed in electricity, with a large tail that whips up and down like a roller coaster, like a long serpent's tail. And guess what? We have heard stories from ancient history of a serpent coming in, Quetzalcoatl, the great plumed serpent, which the ancients formed in their mind or visualized or reported because it's had a tail that was sinusoidally vibrating or flagellating vertically, creating waves in this long trailing tail of itself. And they visualized this as an incoming serpent. And the ancients also, according to the great Roman historian Pliny, there were two of them, Pliny the Elder and Pliny the Younger. And one of them, or at least but maybe both of them, recorded, I have it written down here, I have it recorded, that they had stated in their writings that ancients saw a great ball of fire come in. It looked like a corkscrew of fire. It was dark red, and it coiled like a serpent, and it changed its shape. Well, naturally, you would expect that as this sort of electrified bee with electrified bubblegum tail trailing it comes in. What happens? It pulls the string of bubblegum, and as it comes in further and further, that long stream of bubblegum gets stretched to the point where it just snaps off. And what happens when you snap off on a rubber band? It begins to oscillate vertically. Even the ancient Chinese civilizations recorded this and dramatized it in their legend in the form of a choreography called the Great Dragon Dance. And in Chinatown, in any city of the U.S. and in China, you'll see the Great Dragon Dance from their ancestors' choreographical representation of a legend of this great serpent in the sky. And what does that dragon look like? It looks like men dressed up in a costume to form a huge vertically waving tunnel. And then each man will bob up and down alternately to form a serpent's tail flagellating the great dragon. So there you go. The ancients have recorded it in the form of choreographed dragon, and also the ancient Mayans and the Aztecs and the South American Indians talk about the thunderbird. You've heard about the thunderbird? It's actually changed shape. It's the object coming in, and now what happens is its tail will snap, and then the tail, then after it snaps like bubble gum, but it's electrical bubble gum. It's plasma. After that tail snaps, gets closer to the sun, the tail gets pulled up by the sun's residual electrical charge, space charge surrounding the sun, which is negative. The space charge surrounding the sun is primarily the electrons, so it's a negative charge, and the protons surrounding the incoming comet are positive. And we know that positive and electrical charges attract one another. So as this object comes closer and closer to the sun, its tail of electrically positive protons snaps and pulls inward as to like the trailer of a bride's wedding gown, more or less. And you would pick up the bride's wedding gown, and so that it doesn't drag too much, and hold it upward toward the back of the bride. That's what happens to this comet's positive charge. Then it begins to envelop the entire comet itself, and now the comet's coma, which is the surrounding charge around the comet, begins to grow in size. And that's what happened to Comet Holmes 2008 that came in. I believe it was Comet Holmes. I looked at that comet every night in the sky, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger because the tail was compressing and collapsing into the sunward attracting comet itself. So the coma grew because it was being built up by what was formerly the tail electrical charge. And now, as a comet gets closer, this incoming dwarf star, which is now on a cometary orbit, or acting like a comet electrically, this incoming dwarf star gets close enough to the sun, there's going to be a discharge. There has to be a discharge. This is basic physics. When if you live in a cold environment, a cold area of the country, you know that in the wintertime, when you walk out to your car, very often, your hand gets very close to the metal handle on the car to open the car door. Perhaps even your hand may be only like a few hairs breadths away from the metal. Then the force of the static charge in your body overcomes the resistance posed by the tiny, minuscule distance from between your tip of your finger and the metal car door. So the resistance is overcome in an instant. There is a crack, like a lightning flash, and you feel this sting, this instantaneous, painful sting of electricity from your hand. That electricity is generated in the intensity of several hundreds of volts. Many could be up to 1,000 volts of electricity. The only difference, the reason you don't get electrocuted is because there's not enough electrical charge to actually kill you. But the voltage itself is built up to a voltage of hundreds of volts. And of course, lightning is another obvious, well-known phenomenon that depicts what happens when electric charge is built up by rising particles of moisture into the air, and as they rise, each one is picking up a piece of dust in the air and carrying with it an electrical particle, usually an electron. And now the electrons get built up into one huge cloud of trillions and trillions and trillions of electrons until the accumulation of these charges creates an electric field so intense that automatically, immediately, at some point in its intensity, it overcomes the resistance between that posed by the air between the cloud and the ground, and there's an instantaneous discharge of these electrons in the form of a lightning bolt of many thousands and thousands of volts with tremendous, many, many thousands of joules of energy, enough to, fry an elephant in a fraction of a second, enough to, incinerate a building.
Do you think, John, that this is why we're having so many people that are being struck by lightning? Because there's been quite a few mass lightning strikes where 12 to 15 people are being hit by lightning at once. They just had one down there in Florida.
That is another effect of this incoming comet. I mean, it's an incoming dwarf star. The weather, again, due to the Earth's core being off-center, is causing such a jet stream, such undulations in the jet stream, that you're having storms being created, because now you have this roller coaster effect of the jet stream going up and down across the country, especially during the poor, especially afflicting the poor people of the Midwest, around Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri.
Are you familiar with what's going on in India with the heat, the extreme heat? I mean, they're actually having 128-degree heat down there, and people are actually dying just standing in the streets.
They've had in the past these heat waves, and now they're getting more intense because as the intensity of all these Earth disasters is increasing, and the frequency, not only the frequency, but the magnitude of each is increasing. And I haven't heard about India, but I certainly believe it, and I have to check that out because it's so tragic. We have to not only get scared, but get prepared. I often say that. And I have thought of ways that we can apply basic physics to protect ourselves from the intense heat that is coming. The movie Knowing, everybody should go to YouTube, make a little note of this, whoever's listening. Go to YouTube and type in Knowing movie, Knowing movie. 2009, Nicolas Cage, where they talk about a great heat. The whole theme of the movie is toward the end, it builds up to this theme. That is that the sun is going to get so hot, it'll produce coronal mass ejections that are so powerful that it will scorch the earth. And people are told by the government at the last minute, go underground, start digging, go as far deep as underground as you can because you're going to be burnt. And that's why the power elite are going underground now. They have been going underground. They have been creating underground cities, fabulously costly underground cities, costing trillions of dollars, stolen from us.
Yeah, and you know they're also sealing off the caves in the hills in Tennessee and Kentucky. I saw this on YouTube where a guy was up in the hills and he said, I was raised up here and all my life us kids used to come up here and go in these caves. He goes, I want you to see this. And he went up there with his cell phone and he videoed it, and they're actually sealing it off with cement, with like cement and bars, great, so the air still goes in there, but there's no way anyone can get in those caves. And it's because they don't want anyone to have any place to go for protection.
That is so cruel. There was no reason why they should do that. No logical reason to do this except out of cruelty.
Well, out of cruelty, and also it's another way for them to think that more people are going to die in depopulation of the planet.
Right, but not that many people would be going into caves anyway, so why not give them the chance? Why seal them off? That sounds crazy.
Yeah, they're going to every extent, John. And, the fact that they're not telling people, just like all these mass flooding and these fires. I follow the fire that's going on up there in Canada and the McMurray fire, and I don't know, at first everybody was told about it, but I don't think everyone realizes it's still burning, and it has burned over 500,000 acres.
Oh, my goodness. it's still burning. I thought,
yes, it's still burning. And we've got quite a few fires going on ourselves here in our own country that are way out of control. And I do believe that the reason they can't get a lot of these fires under control is because of an article that I read a while back about the chemtrails. The aluminum that's in the chemtrails is killing the trees, and it's also the trees that are living, it's absorbing into the trees, and it makes the trees like a matchstick.
Oh, it makes them more flammable. Oh,
yes.
Wow.
So I think that was part of their agenda as far as, the more devastation that they put on this earth, because look at all the people that are being dislodged out of their homes, and where do they go?
Yeah, it's so horrible and tragic. I saw the guy, people nowadays can give you on-the-scene videos of these horrible events because everybody has cell phone cameras and all that, and there was one guy escaping in his car in the McMurray fire that you just referred to, and there was flames all around him as he was trying to drive out of there, and he was saying, this is the last time I'm ever going to see my house, and there's terror trying to get out of there. It's such a horrible thing being engulfed in a wildfire, but let me tell you, my friend told me, and he's a real colleague of mine who helps to me to pick up on all the information that's going on around regarding the earth disasters, and because I can't keep track of them all, there's so many. He told me, he says, that McMurray fire occurred spontaneously over a huge area in a matter, all at the same time. He says that was caused by meteors. Meteors. We have so many meteors, so many sightings of shooting stars. What it is these objects like rocks about the size.
I have noticed that there are a lot more videos on Facebook where people are seeing a lot more meteors. Yeah. I have noticed a big uptake in that. And another thing that I wanted to mention was an uptake in the volcanoes. There's actually 40 volcanoes that are active around the Ring of Fire right now. And I was watching Michael Snyder on the Jim Baker show about a week or so ago, and he was saying that 3 volcanoes in the United States popped off all at the same time, and at that same time there were earthquakes that were occurring around the base of the volcanoes, 4 to 5 point earthquakes. And he also said that there was a lot of 4 and 5 point earthquakes that are occurring around the edge of Yellowstone, and they're not reporting this stuff to us.
Because they don't want to panic the public. They rather see us die. They figure, hey, look, let's not tell them now. We're still in power. We can somehow and desperately, against hope against all hope, that they can maintain their greedy grip on the people through fear. And remember, if they tell us all these things are happening, people will stop paying their taxes. That's another reason. They want to maintain their power over us and their bleeding of us. So
people would instead of paying their taxes, would be buying emergency food and preparing for this, which is what we need to get everyone to understand, that not everyone's going to die from this, and that we do need to prepare ourselves. If we should survive it, like you said, there's not going to be any motors running. There's not going to be any trucks running. There's not going to be any trains running. There's not going to be any airplanes running. There's not going to be any food shipped. A lot of the food that's being produced, there's not going to be anyone there to produce it. So you're going to have to, learn to sustain with emergency food until you can grow your own food.
That's right. You're right. So we've got to start preparing. A lot of it is basic common sense. Store can now. Before Fukushima occurred, before the ocean was radioactive, I had bought many cans of sardines from Brunswick brand sardines from Canada, which are the best. Even now, with the Earth, this ocean somewhat radioactive from the Fukushima discharges, we still can buy sardines. Find out how radioactive they are. It may not be very severe. There may be a cleansing effect of the ocean where the radioactivity somehow does not affect the salmon and the sea life as much, and maybe it's still edible. I don't know. But another thing you can get in addition to sardines are about the healthiest food you can get, it's canned. But if you're concerned about the radioactivity, get canned white meat chicken. I have some of that too from 2000. It's got an expiration date of 2013. It's probably still good. I'm hoping to be able to use it. Some of it may go bad, but a lot of times these canned foods are still edible even beyond their stated expiration date. And you have germicides too. Even if you have stuff that might have bacteria, if you've got silver germicides, you can mix them in there and kill. And you also, if you have oil of oregano, you can kill the bacteria. So, this is my intuition that some of that food that may be old, you could still use if you kill the bacteria with oil of oregano and with silver germicide. But anyway, the bottom line is store canned white meat chicken. These are good forms of protein. Another thing is that easily, keeps very well is dried grains. But these are special grains that are non-gluten, and they're like complete protein-y, equivalent to that of the protein quality of meat or chicken, and that is amaranth, Amaranth. If you go to Whole Foods, or you can buy it packaged, but if you go to Whole Foods, you can get it in bulk with a big scoop into the plastic bag, at only $2.69 a pound. Now that amaranth is tiny little beads, tiny little white beads. It looks like millet, if you've ever seen millet. And when you cook them in water, they soften up, and you could eat it. Well, the amaranth is what nourished the Peruvian Indians for centuries. It is extremely nutritious, and I try to buy amaranth every time I go there at $2.69 a pound from Whole Foods.
Yeah, and another thing that people are buying is rice, because rice is cheap. You can get it cheap right now. I suggest you get it now.
I would avoid
because
rice.
All of the extreme weather, a lot of the rice paddies have been destroyed.
Rice. I would avoid rice. You don't need.
Well, one of the rices you have to avoid is the Wu Chang rice. I read an article that they're mixing plastic in with it, and they're coating the plastic with a rice scent smell, and it's causing health problems.
Oh my!
But why would you avoid rice?
It'll kill. But right. No, I would avoid not only the synthetic rice, but also the genuine rice. You don't need rice, because rice is, first of all, it's not good. It's starchy. It causes intestinal clogging. And rice does not have all the complete proteins. You have to mix rice with beans or legumes in order to get complete proteins. And even then, you may be missing out in the balance of amino acids, which your body absolutely needs in order to reproduce new cells. So what you need to do is get complete protein grain. I would never buy not even buy any rice at all when I've got something as wonderful as amaranth, which is complete protein at $2.69 a pound. Just keep on going to Whole Foods and stock up on amaranth and quinoa. Now, the other one I wanted to mention was quinoa. I believe quinoa has an amino acid balance that is high in protein, that gives you complete protein, equivalent to that of steak or chicken or whatever, which your body absolutely needs in order to reproduce new cells. So amaranth and quinoa they're non-gluten too. You can't beat that. And buckwheat is another. Buckwheat may not be. I'm growing buckwheat on my deck. Buckwheat is so high in. I just read it's so high in vitamin C, which is absolutely.
Sprouts are good too.
Nourishing, and the buckwheat grows wonderfully, and it's like little green leaves that you can harvest. And then after a while, these little tiny white beads of flowers, these beady light little flowers, begin to grow at the top. So you snip them off with a scissors and put them into a jar in your fridge, whatever, along with your dandelions. Everybody is inundated with dandelions in their yard. So I got a few dandelions. I planted them in the planter on my deck, and now I've got dandelions proliferating. The dandelion
and dandelion root is a great cure for cancer.
Really?
You know that?
That's terrific. I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Dandelion root is an actual cancer cure.
Oh, that's wonderful. And also the dandelion leaf is very cleansing. One of your greatest cleansing, body cleansing, blood cleansing foods is God's dandelions. He gives us so many of them, we try to kill them with pesticides. All God's gifts. So I took some of them and grow it, and they multiply wonderfully, and they proliferate green leaves rapidly. So I keep on cutting them off.
I'll send you my article on the dandelion root.
Seeds. You can grow the buckwheat and high vitamin C and put that in your vegetable fruit blend. I make a vegetable fruit blend. You can grow all this stuff. Start growing stuff on your deck. Start buying canned
cilantro is another good one that you should be able to grow, and it's good for your body. Good detox, and it also is a cancer cure. But we are coming up on the last few minutes of the show, so I am going to ask if there's anybody on the phone that would like to raise your hand or ask John a question. We're going to give you the opportunity to ask a question or make a statement real quick. And, John, the time just goes by so fast, doesn't it?
Sure does.
And it's funny because when I tell people, when I call them up and tell them I'm going to do a show with you and it's 2 hours, they go, 2 hours? What can I talk about for 2 hours? But, when it's an intense subject, especially like this, it just goes by. But we do have someone that has their hand raised, so we will unmute. Good evening, Arizona. Welcome to the show. Do you have a question or a comment for John?
Yes, I do. Hi. I am very much a believer in prayer, and I would like to know what would be the best way to pray for this situation.
Okay. Thanks for that question. This is the most important issue of all. God is bringing upon these disasters upon the human race in order to scare us, not so much to punish us, but to scare us into His arms. I call it scaring hell out of us and scaring heaven into us. So what I do to pray is CGIP, contemplate God's invisible presence as you're washing the dishes. CGIP, contemplate God's invisible presence. As you're mowing the lawn, contemplate God's invisible presence. As you're going to get the mail out of the mailbox, throughout the day, as much as possible, when you contemplate God's invisible presence, you are inviting God into your mind. You are giving Him the fellowship and the friendship and the recognition of knowing that that invisible being is the one who created you. And God responds. He calls that prayer. This is what God defines truly as worship. Because worship, I try to find out the definition of worship, and it simply is this. When someone worships, a man worships the opposite sex. His mind is on women. He's worshiping the opposite sex. When a woman worships the opposite sex, her mind is on men, men, men. When someone worships money, their mind is constantly on making money, making money. When someone worships power, that's what their mind is constantly on, is power. So whatever your mind is obsessed with, that is worshiping. When your mind is obsessed with God, you are worshiping God. God commands us to worship Him because He doesn't want as an egoist, but He created you as a part of Him. You are like one drop of rain falling into the ocean and blending in with the ocean. God is the ocean, and you're the falling drop of rain. God wants you to be. You are a part of Him, and He wants you to become a true part of Him by blending with Him. So when you blend with God's Spirit in your mind, when you pass on from this life, you will become God. You will become a part of God. As the Lord Jesus says, you will become an heir with the Son, not just a servant, but you will become an heir. You will become like the Son. You are the Son. He tells us in John 10, you are all sons of God. The only thing is we are flawed sons of God now, but He will make us perfect sons of God, equal to Himself. So by you worshiping God, just contemplate God's invisible presence, and you will get the inspiration to read the Bible. When you read the Bible, reading the Bible is not really worshiping God, but reading the Bible and then contemplating God's presence as you read it, God will give you the deep insights of the Bible that only like an ocean diver would get by going into a diving bell, going deep into the ocean. He sees the wonderful life and flora that exists in the depths of the sea, whereas someone on board a ship only gets to see the surface. So when you read the Bible, just read the Bible. All you get is the surface of the meaning. But when you pray the Bible with feeling God's presence guiding you, then he takes you into the depths of the meaning, all the symbolic meaning of the Bible, and it's wonderful. So by contemplating God's invisible presence, you will be inspired by God's Spirit to read the Bible. And I have to do more of that. I contemplate God and pray to God more than I read the Bible, but I have to do that too. So this is what you need to do. Get your mind on contemplating his presence, and everything.
And we got to keep in mind too, John, that the Lord keeps angels around us. So don't forget our angels, thank him for them and ask for their guidance, ask for their protection, and ask the Lord for his protection, and ask the Lord to guide us through this because, we need his guidance through this. We can't look at it as taking it on ourselves.
When you worship God by simply contemplating his presence throughout the day, he guarantees that we will be protected from these natural disasters supernaturally. He will protect us. That's guaranteed.
And we are in the last days. I mean, you can see that with all the havoc that's going on, the way man is getting all about themselves, and all these mass shootings and all the turmoil that's going on throughout the world, the war that's coming upon us. And, we just have to not concentrate on that because the Lord tells us that all these things will happen.
That's
we have to look at it in a way that, he told us that these things were going to happen and that we are his children and he will guide us through it.
Yes, all these terrors and mass shootings and wars, acts of terror are all coming from Satan. Woe unto the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil will come down unto you, having great wrath, for he will know that he has but a short time. The Lord Jesus tells us this in Revelation chapter 12. So Satan is creating all the mass shootings and all this evil in order to terrify us so that we will go to Satan's government for protection. But God says, no, my power is more fearful than Satan's power, and God's power of earthquakes is going to drive us to God. Embrace God rather than embracing Satan. So contemplate God's presence, and that's what I do to save yourself from this. Although you will be targeted by Satan because you will be devoted to God, the Savior.
Oh, yeah.
And you will be targeted by Satan. However, if he kills us, he may kill us. He says in Revelation, God the Savior tells us in Revelation 3, you will be exterminated. He says you will be killed. You will be beheaded. You will be, but be faithful to me unto death, and I will give you a crown of eternal life. So don't worry, he can give you the strength to go through death. He gave John the Baptist, God gave John the Baptist the power to endure being beheaded. Somehow he took the spirit out of John, I believe, and so that John did not have to suffer that pain and agony of being beheaded. Same thing with the Apostle Paul. So God will protect us to the moment of our extermination. I hate to say it because people are going to say, well, wait a minute, I don't want to be a Christian if I'm going to be killed by Satan. Some of us won't be. If we turn to God now, there's a period where if you turn to God, you will be protected. Revelation 12 tells us he will give us the place of safety. David J. Smith used to talk about this, where they will not, the dragon, Satan, will not be able to get to us because a great earthquake will occur and swallow up the dragon's army. So there will maybe places where God will cause natural disasters to block Satan's hand of revenge against us and to give us...
I have been asked, John, if God is such a loving God, why would he allow this to happen to the earth and the people? And my belief about why this is happening is because Satan has taken over the world. Everyone has turned on the Lord. They're taking God out of everything, off the money, out of the church. You can't have a cross on a tent for the military. The Muslims are overrunning the world, saying that everything to do with Christianity offends them. And the only way God's going to put a stop to this is to reset the planet.
That incidentally, that anti-Muslim, all that Muslim evil has been perpetrated, created, and hyped up deliberately by the forces of Satan, who are the diabolical ruling elite, who rule this planet. They created an enemy, which is Islam. Islam is never, basically, they may have, I'm a Christian, but they never have really tried to kill people, except maybe in certain countries, people have been beheaded or whatever, stoned for being Christians. But the Christians and Muslims got along very well in many countries of the Middle East. I happen to know that. And now, when these diabolical ruling elite, many of them ruled by the Zionist rulers, not the Jewish people, but the Zionist rulers, like the evil serpent Netanyahu, who was actually the mastermind of the 9/11 Holocaust that exterminated and incinerated 3,000 people. Netanyahu was documentably one of the masterminds of that, in order to blame the Arabs and make everybody hate the Arabs so that they could go to war and take over the Middle East. This is part of the diabolical ruling elite. And the Jewish people themselves.
Well, you know that Russia has been on RT News, and they're telling their people about Planet X on their news.
Yeah, that's great that they are. So what we have to do is love. The love of God is going to bring a love between us. I think I answered. I'm so emphatic about answering the woman's question about praying and contemplating God's presence, because this is what's going to repel and vanquish the evil that is enveloping all of humankind. People are becoming evil. The Lord Jesus Christ, the Savior, the Son of God, told us that men will hate each other. Iniquity will rise up. Why? Because evil will be. Fallen angels are now invading the earth and indwelling people. People are becoming more evil now, with tattoos all over, all kinds of body piercing, symbolizing the onset of the mark of the beast. People are doing diabolical things sexually and hating one another, fighting, killing one another, beheading, and all. Troops are being told, American troops are being told to be vicious monsters, and
it's really getting bad out there. And that's another reason why we need to pray for humanity along for ourselves, that some of these people are shown or shaken and waking up.
Spirit of God in you, as you invoke the Spirit of God by worshiping, contemplating God's presence, you are repelling these demons, these invisible demons who are indwelling human beings throughout the earth. God's superior power of love in you, as you invoke His Spirit, will repel them. And this is how you fight the spiritual battle. It can never be fought by men. Man can never overcome the powers of angels, fallen angels, because angels are infinitely superior in power, mentally as well as physically, to mankind. But when you invoke the power of God in your heart and in your mind by contemplating God's presence, this is the prayer that will vanquish evil from the hearts of many men, not all men, but you will be bringing people to God, and you will be winning souls for God by simply contemplating God's presence. I know of this. I know this. I've been given this feeling by God, God's Spirit, this understanding by God's Spirit. So just, even if you don't say a word about the gospel, which you should, but even if you don't say a word, your spirit in you is shining. Let your light so shine, the Lord Jesus Christ said, that all will see your good works. Well, what he meant was, feel the Spirit of God. Don't put on a phony, shining, smiling, pious face. No. Feel the Spirit of God, and His Spirit will radiate around you. That's what I do myself in order to bring God's Spirit into my wife and my son and people around me. I simply, if I'm on the subway, for example, in New York, I contemplate God's presence so that God's light of God's Spirit will radiate through me invisibly and silently to others around me. This is how you fight the spiritual battle and defeat evil. And at the same time, you are making yourself a future as part of God, a son of God, an heir of God, a part of God in the coming world, where you will have a new body, a brand new body, guaranteed by the Scriptures, that will never die, never get old, never get sick, will be indestructible, and you will live forever in a renewed earth far superior to this polluted earth.
Yeah. So we need to, get our priorities straight and stay close to the Lord. Well, John, we've gone almost 10 minutes over. So I want to thank you, Arizona, for your question. And I want to thank you so much, John, for coming on tonight at the last minute. It's been a real interesting show. I hope to have enough time to have you come back, but I don't feel that we're going to have this pole shift within the next few months. I feel that it's gradually coming. We can see it with the effects of our planet, but I think we do have some time to before it happens, don't you?
We have probably many more months than you would expect before the great disasters really occur and the whole world goes into chaos. So we've got time, and God is making sure that He gives us enough time to bring others to faith. So we should continue with this.
And that's the most important thing, is we have to shine our light and try to make others realize that this is this is the final countdown.
Yes.
This is the final countdown. There's no redos. And I think the Lord has held this off for quite some time to give people more time. But, and people that are having devastation with fires and their homes being burned out, or flooding and their homes being washed away, they are in devastation and not knowing what's happening, and they need to find out the truth, that this is all happening because of what's coming at us, and that material things aren't what are important right now. Saving our spirit is what's important.
Yes, material things just to stay alive so that we can continue to bring God's Spirit into others, to radiate God's Spirit as we invoke it in our contemplative worship of God's presence.
Well, I want to thank you again, John, for coming on, and, we didn't really get to go into the third secret as much as I wanted to, but maybe we'll have you come back and we'll go over that a little bit more.
Yes, okay, good. Thanks so much. I'm very grateful for you having me to communicate with your audience. Thanks.
Well, it has been a delight, and I want to let you know that I did send you out an email with that recording of the ceremony that they did down there at the CERN Collider. We might want to come on one night and talk about the CERN Collider, because that's part of what they're doing down there. Is they're trying to open a porthole, and they're trying to create the Big Bang and be God themselves,
Yes, they're ushering in demonic spirits, and this is a physical proof of it right here with the CERN activity that's going on.
I don't know, have you seen the last time that they started that up? There are pictures on the internet where the electrical charges that are coming out of the ground, it looks like the ground is actually cooking, and there are some faces in those clouds.
Wow, that's amazing. And this is what was done thousands of years ago when God destroyed the earth, because evil was rising. Satan's evil was rising to such a fever pitch. God destroyed the world in the past, and this is a recurring destruction against the rise of Satan's evil, recurring over millennia.
Yeah, I'll send you a lot of the information that I have on what's going on with CERN, and maybe we can get back together in a few weeks, and we'll talk a little bit more about the third secret and exactly what's going on with this CERN Collider.
Okay, thanks. I'll have to study up on it. That's a great idea. Because
well, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and like I said, I called John this afternoon out of the blue and said, hey, come on tonight, and I really appreciate the last minute, coming on.
Well, I'm so grateful to be able to relate this important information to so many people.
Absolutely. And God bless you, John, in your work, and may the Lord keep you safe and everybody else out there that's listening. God bless all you, and may the Lord keep you all safe.